Hi, my name is Stephen, and this is Astro Indicator Update, Excursions into Practical Astrology. And this is episode 27, and today's date is January 25th, 2020. And today's content, we'll look at price charts with the astrology Astro dates indicated for the New York Stock Exchange, the Dow Jones Industrials, gold, silver, Bitcoin, US dollar. In addition, we'll look at an interesting chart that I recently came across of the Dow Gold Ratio, and then a chart of gold seasonals. And then we'll take a brief look at Bernie Sanders' astrology and his transits. So we've seen this before. This is an update of the Dow Jones Industrials. This is for the last candle that you see here is for Friday the 24th. I have kind of conventional technical analysis indicators drawn in. We have a channel line here. We have the blue lines that are support and resistance areas. MACD, the MACD is here, RSI down below. All the vertical lines relate to the astrology of the Dow Jones Industrials. And I usually say that include this qualifier that the Dow Jones to me seems like possibly the most manipulated market, with gold being maybe the second, or maybe they're equal. However, sentiment can change, confidence in the system can change, and suddenly the trend is going in reverse, and then the technicals kick in again. Look what we had on Friday. We had, a down day. It was trading below this resistance, this support area, this trend line for much of the day, and right at the end of the day it came back just to rest upon that resistance level. So it's an attempt, obviously, by the big money players to maintain some confidence in the system. Looking back, we had a very bullish astrology day. These vertical lines, again, are related to the astrology. We had a very bullish couple days back in on January 17th. I think it was the 16th and 17th. And we hit our high on the 17th, and now we've been coming down. Now, the important point with this chart is that astrology on that particular day only occurs about in similar strength, only occurs about 4 times a year. So we want to see what happens after that date, whether the trend is maintained or whether it's an exhaustion indicator. And it could just be an exhaustion indicator. We got our, a bump up, on that day. It should, we're above resistance at this point. We should be going higher, but we have not throughout this past week. We have other international things going on with the coronavirus scare that is happening and so forth. Impeachment is going on, etc. However, I do factor those in, but I look at the astrology, and the astrology is telling me right now that a very bullish indicator has already occurred, and if we do not get a bullish response following through and carrying forth from that date, then I start to lean in the bearish direction. I'm going to play the technicals as well. We combine a number of systems here, but if we close beneath this trend line, I don't see a lot of extremely bullish dates going forward. And so you need to watch the Dow Jones, the stock market in general, very carefully because the primary, for a number of months, the primary Dow Jones bullish astrology indicators are in the past. Okay, let's take a look at gold. And let me shuffle my notes around just a little bit so I can see what's happening. So in gold, let's see. We've also gone through some quite bullish indicators, but we have some in the not too distant future. And so like one of the strongest dates was back here on mid-December. And that really had a lot of follow through. And it blew us right through this resistance area, the blue line. We've now done what appears to be a back test to that level, and now we're getting a bounce. Now, after this, we do not have a lot, but we are in the midst of very powerful, strong, bullish, seasonal time periods. And we do have some astrology approaching. For example, on, let's see, I have February 4th drawn in here. Actually, I probably could have drawn in January 26th, but the January 26th is tomorrow, and so that's why it's not drawn in. Okay, Sunday. You know, Saturday and Sundays are difficult. If a date occurs Sunday afternoon, then I draw it in. But this didn't really occur. So, you know, tomorrow is questionable. We may get some follow through into Monday, some bullish follow through into this Monday. But after that, I'm looking at February 4th, and then February 13th. You could write those down, February 4th, February 13th, and then we have a strong one right at the beginning of March. We are in, as I've said earlier, we're going to look at some gold seasonals later in this broadcast, but we may just get, we're a little bit overbought in the MACD, the MACD. We may just get, a couple days of bullish follow through here, but then trade sideways. I would love us to see us stay above 1550, but 1550 is the key level for me. Again, we should have another strong bullish time period around March 1st. Okay, silver, we had a nice pop on Friday, and which was sort of related to something that was happening on the 22nd, now that I look at my notes, which was Wednesday, and which oddly enough I had not drawn in. But we do have some strong things coming up this Tuesday that we need to look at closely. On the 28th, 29th, the 31st, and then into February 9th or so, which is up here. I have 9th and 10th. So in many respects, silver to me is looking stronger than gold, particularly if we can get through these two resistance levels, these two blue lines. So again, the dates are the 28th, which is this upcoming Tuesday, 28th, 29th, January 31st, and February 9th are all key dates in silver. So, but combine these systems, combine it with standard technical analysis. This is not trading advice. I'm just sharing with you kind of a sliver of my research into, the dynamics of astrology when applied to different markets. So let's look at Bitcoin. And in Bitcoin, it looks like apparently we had a little bounce off of this blue level. As I find my notes, please excuse me for a second. And so we bounced, which is a good sign. We had this resistance level right here turned into support. We had a bounce on Friday. We are still overbought in the MACD though. And upcoming, we have a number of sort of volatility indicators, and then should be a strong date on February 1st and on February 8th. Now, I would have wished that an astrology date would have been associated with this bounce on Friday. To me, it's mostly technical. I'm not sure if it's going to hold until we, later midweek here. If we stay sort of at this level until midweek, then the odds are that the astrology is going to point to a higher bounce. Okay, even though we're a little bit overbought here, the RSI has come down to a more neutral area. But this would be perfect because this is a strong area. We had one bounce. If we definitely have another bounce later this week, I think that would be a very good sign in Bitcoin. Okay, now the U.S. dollar is in a little bit of a rally mode, and I think that's because people are getting a little nervous about other things. They tend to go to the dollar. But when you have the Federal Reserve pumping billions and billions of dollars a day into the repo market, this doesn't have a lot of longevity in my book. But we have seen a number of bullish astrology dates in here, and one of the strongest was on Thursday. This one right there that I'm pointing out. I could have been drawing in a few lines here. Yeah, this line right there was one of the strongest of the year. Okay, and we will see if we break this level. If we don't break that level, then similar to the Dow Jones Industrials, it sort of suggests that this particular market is starting to weaken if we don't have a follow through after this very strong day. We do have a number of dates coming up, but they're just not as strong as this past Thursday. So you'll have to look at next Thursday, January 30th, and then really February 11th, way out here, is the next really strong date. But they're, if I was going to evaluate them and give them a grade, they're kind of like B grade, in strength, whereas this is definitely an A grade. So watch this level. If it starts to pull back, I think this market is heading down. Okay, I got this from Egon von Greyer's website. I think it's Gold Switzerland. And I found it very interesting. It is the Dow Gold Ratio going back over 20 years. And what it's telling us is that when it's sort of gold and looking at gold's movement in relation to the Dow, and when the Dow is rising, we get, let's see here now, how am I saying this in here? Yeah, when the Dow is rising, we get a drop in gold. And so in the last 10 years, the Dow has been going up and gold has been going down. So this is sort of reflective of the Dow Jones Industrial strength. And now when we look at the MACD over this period of time, we can see that this cycle has risen to a very high point. We're getting lines crossing here, which rarely happen, but when they do, that's usually telling us that the trend has changed. And in this case, it would mean that the Dow Jones Industrials has probably hit its peak, and that gold is probably going higher. Okay. And probably for many years. And this is just a long-term ratio, chart ratio, and when you see the MACD behaving like this, usually it's a trend change, and in this case, history tells us at least that it could mean another leg higher for gold as the Dow Jones starts to fall. Here's a chart of which I kind of liked of gold seasonals. And the nice part about it is it charts the 5-year, 10, 20, and 45-year average. And in each of those time periods, we are in a very bullish, very bullish seasonal period up until March for gold. Now, the interesting thing why I included this is that in the astrology of gold, we have a quite bullish indicator right on March 1st. And we'll just have to see if that has some strength and that leads us into, furthering this upswing into the the month of March. However, generally speaking, in all these years, we see a leveling off and a kind of a trading sideways of the gold market for a number of months, at least until we get to August. Okay, let's look at some astrology here. Now, what I found fascinating, this is Bernie Sanders' birth chart. He has a sun in Virgo right here, moon in Aries conjunct Mars, which is very, compounding a very fiery personality. On top of that, he has Scorpio on his ascendant. The ruler of Scorpio is Mars. Mars in its most exalted sign, Aries, conjunct the moon, okay? Well, there's some things about Bernie Sanders I really like. I don't, his position essentially on reducing spending, government spending, reducing the military budget, those things I agree with. But what struck me about this chart is that, the identity of Bernie Sanders politically is that he's an independent, but then he has a history of advocating socialist ideas, either, democratic socialism or whatever you want to call it. And that is essentially a more collectivist philosophy, that the state is, is stronger and is there to help, regulate the abuses of power differences of class and money and so forth. Well, and I can see some of this in his chart because, being a Virgo, he's someone that wants to serve the public interest, wants to feel like he's in service. He's sort of a perfectionist. He's a very hard worker. The collective orientation, though, from an astrological standpoint, comes from his Mercury being in close approximation to Neptune. And it's the Neptune that is often associated with communism or socialism or collectivism. And in this case, this Mercury is particularly strong. It's the ruler of his sun sign. It's also rules the 10th house sign. This is the 10th house in astrology, which is what you're recognized for in the public, maybe related to your profession, things of that nature. And here it is that ruler, Mercury, which is how your mind works, maybe your philosophy somewhat. It is combined with Neptune, which has a very communal orientation of unifying differences and let's see, what else could I say on this point? Essentially, looking at the whole world and seeing how, and because Virgo is a perfectionistic sign, seeing the ideal that could possibly exist in the world if we had more equality and unification politically. And so he leans in that direction. And my feeling is that tends to be excessively idealistic, because I've never really seen a socialist system not end up in a communist system not end up into being a pure dictatorship in some form. But, there's some good things, because Neptune is associated with greater compassion and, love for humanity and things of that nature. Well, the reason I'm examining Bernie's chart is that he has two extremes going in this chart. And he's in his life, he's attempted to integrate in some fashion these extremes. One extreme is this collectivism, philosophy, but the other extreme is that his sun moon in Aries is completely an intensified energy that's very individualistic. Okay, and so he channels some of his energy and his feistiness and his drive and his ambition and so forth, into these areas that he thinks will better society. But also there's a very individualistic, independent energy there. So it doesn't quite mesh easily with a socialized view of the world. And so he's an interesting character in this regard, because he has these two extremes in his nature. We could look at his transits and see how they might relate to his campaign, his political interests, and so forth. Well, one thing that's going on that really stands out is that in this outer ring we have the transits. This is where the planets are right now, okay? And this inner ring is his natal chart that we just looked at. And in the transits we have Neptune in the sky right now is at 16 Pisces. Well, this is for the last 2 years, a year and a half, this has been directly opposite his sun. So his whole identity, at least in the press, in the public eye, and even in his own mind, has been this identification with, his socialist views. There is a possibility that may have been, in his own mind, that may have been slipping a little bit. Because sometimes when a person goes through a strong Neptune transit, their own identity becomes hard to define, and he's been so changing his views. I'm not sure if he has that much. I don't track him all that much, but it's usually a very difficult time, because people's own identity is shifting and is becoming a little bit unclear even to themselves what they represent. And so this could be happening to Bernie, but on the whole it does represent his socialist orientation. In addition to this, I wanted to point out, so we have a number of things in here that actually do not, again, if I was going to look at everybody in the field, there's a number of things that I do like about Bernie, okay? I'm just going to say that. However, in a Saturn cycle, which is right here, that little red thing right in my circle, it's Saturn. It takes 28 years to make a cycle. Saturn is fairly predictable, reliable in telling us when the greatest amount of public recognition and success in your field is going to come about. Now, a person can, relatively speaking, experience success at any point in the cycle. But again, I'm going to emphasize the relativeness of that, because in this quadrant, when Saturn is going down in this quadrant, normally people are finding it very difficult to succeed in whatever endeavor they're engaged in. And it would be much better if he was a much younger man, and this was 14 years ahead of 14 years in the future. he would the receptivity of his views nationally would be much greater, I think. He just has an uphill battle in order to win this election with, from an astrological standpoint, with Saturn in this position right now in his chart. Okay. In addition, he doesn't have the best placement of Saturn relative to his Venus. It's squaring Venus. Here it is, that little blue thing, that's Venus right there. And Venus is 90 degrees away from, I'll draw a line. So Venus and Saturn are 90 degrees away from Pluto and Saturn down here are 90 degrees away from Venus, and will be for much of this year, okay? And generally, that's also a challenging time period for someone to appear attractive, to be, of interest to the public at large. And it just, he's got the deck kind of stacked against him a little bit. Things will modify somewhat as the election approaches, because we do have right here, let me see if I can draw it, that planet, Jupiter, is moving closer to this 22-degree position as we move into next November. And that will offset and balance out some of the negative elements to Pluto-Saturn that are undermining his generalized appeal to the public, as represented by Venus here. And actually, it'll be a positive thing. So if he can get the nomination, that will be very positive for him. I can't say for certain if it'll override the overall Saturn cycle that I was speaking about earlier that's kind of stuck in this first quadrant. But the closer he gets, if he got the nomination, it is a positive, I would say. I can't say that he'll win, because this somewhat similar thing is happening in Donald Trump's chart. As Jupiter moves to 22 degrees Capricorn, that's actually a positive for Trump as well. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out and mostly point out these divergent energies in Bernie's chart, and how it's been a challenge probably for him to integrate them. This acutely individualistic, side to him, and then the side that sort of favors the state, strengthening the collective, in the collectivist philosophy. So they seem to be opposed in my book. Anyway, so that's I think all I have for today. And again, my name is Stephen. I have an art and psychology background. I've been studying astrology for over 40 years and applying it to financial markets for 25 years. I am concerned about the Federal Reserve and its methods and how it's undermining our currency. So I advocate hard money and cryptocurrency as tools to protect your own financial sovereignty. I do accept Bitcoin. I do sometimes do individual consultations, and you can contact me at astroindicator at gmail.com, astroindicator@gmail.com. So I do these maybe on a bi-weekly basis. If you would like to get notified, subscribe, and please like me if you feel it was worth your time. So anyway, thanks for listening. Bye for now.